Today, we bring you another episode in our series on wilderness disappearances. This is the sad, strange case of Sergeant Alex Vance. On this channel, we discuss missing person cases of all kinds. Sometimes the missing are found unharmed, relatively unscathed. Often there's a simple explanation: a misadventure, a misunderstanding, a case of getting lost and found. Those stories usually end with a happy homecoming, and there's no need to dig deeper. But then there are the other cases, the ones that start ordinary and then spiral into confusion, contradiction, and things that simply don't add up. Today is one of those cases. What happened to Sergeant Alex Vance? The vast, imposing wilderness of Blackwood National Park, with its towering, silent peaks, holds a great many unsettling tales, stories of those who venture into its beauty and simply vanish. These incidents, set against a backdrop of truly breathtaking landscapes, have a way of blurring the lines between what is real and what remains profoundly unknown. In the early winter of 2016, a demanding and highly specialized training exercise was scheduled for the search and rescue elite. The location was the park's perilous Arctic sector, a place known for its treacherous ice formations, its shifting glaciers, and its incredibly difficult routes for climbers. This training was organized specifically to practice dealing with catastrophic avalanches and other high-altitude emergencies. The weather at the time was notoriously unstable. High winds howled through the passes, sudden temperature changes could drop degrees in minutes, and irregular heavy snowfall was a constant. Sergeant Alex Vance was a key figure in this operation. A veteran of numerous international rescues, he had worked in every conceivable climate. He had been involved in high-altitude rescues in the Himalayas, tropical extractions from dense jungles, and life-or-death missions in active combat zones. He had won awards for bravery and was noted for an almost unnatural ability to remain calm in the most critical, life-threatening circumstances. These qualities were considered particularly important for the upcoming exercise. It was Alex who was tasked with checking the technical condition of all the equipment, with ensuring that every single participant carried a working search sensor, a beeper. These beepers are a lifeline. They are what helps locate a person buried under tons of snow in the event of an avalanche. Blackwood National Park had a long-standing practice of utilizing military experts for this kind of training. The park staff worked closely with the Army, a collaboration meant to share expertise and save lives. Alex, true to form, scrutinized the weather forecast, reading every report on potential avalanches. There had already been several slides in that area in January. Some had been small, but one had been quite large enough to block a significant portion of a hiking trail. All the instructors knew about it. And yet, in the winter of 2016, the command decided not to cancel the exercise. They believed that the level of training of the rescuers was high enough to handle the risk. No one expected the situation to get so completely out of control. On the early morning of February 12, 2016, a group of rescuers began their ascent. The goal was to practice rappelling down an ice slope and to check radio transmitters in low visibility conditions. The wind speeds increased steadily that day, and temperatures were recorded at a biting -25 degrees Fahrenheit. Some team members reported hearing warning signs. Faint crackling noises in the snow layer were heard in several locations. This often indicates that the internal structure of the snowpack is dangerously unstable. Alex was walking in a bundle, roped to Corporal Ben Carter. They were constantly, obsessively, double-checking how well their gear was secured. In conditions like these, any mistake could cost lives. A harness that breaks, a safety rope that comes loose, the slippery pavement of ice leaves absolutely no chance of holding on. On top of that, they were considering the constant possibility of new avalanches. Snow had been accumulating on the steep slopes all week, a silent, waiting danger. By late afternoon, the wind had picked up to a ferocious howl. Alex radioed base camp to relay the deteriorating situation. He was told to stay along the marked safe line and to stay away from potentially dangerous cornices. But visibility deteriorated so badly that the group was unable to fully complete the training mission before darkness fell. Some of the rescuers had to find a place to wait out the weather, as it was simply too unsafe to return down the mountain at night. Alex and Ben, however, still continued on toward a pre-marked point, a small supply cache they needed to reach. The exact trigger of the avalanche was never determined. One theory is that a heavy block of ice fell from above, dislodging a larger mass of snow. The floes may have slid over old, smooth ice where the layer was particularly slick. When the avalanche started moving, it reached a tremendous, unstoppable speed. Alex and Ben didn't immediately realize what was happening. At first, they thought it was just a powerful gust of wind. But then they heard a muffled roar, and a snowfall came down the slope above them, quickly becoming a raging torrent. Ben tried to grab Alex's arm, but he couldn't. The avalanche swept over Alex, knocking him to the ground and carrying him downward. Small rocks, ice chunks, and sharp shards of rock were also pulled into the snowflow. The pressure of the snow mass can break bones, and the density of the snow after it stops is almost like wet concrete. In such cases, a person cannot move. And if the head is below the surface, there is a huge risk of suffocation. Ben was lucky. He was thrown a little sideways and was able to grab onto a rock ledge. When the bulk of the snow was gone, he stayed on the surface. He escaped serious injury with only bruises and abrasions. He called out to Mark, but no one answered. The snow was settling fast, and they had to act as quickly as possible because the victim had a limited amount of time to get air into his lungs. Ben started calling for help on his radio, but the wind and interference in the mountains made communication unstable. Eventually, his signal was picked up at the bottom, where several other rescuers were standing. They moved quickly to the top. Some of them walked while others tried snowmobiles as far as the terrain allowed. But the paths to the avalanche cone were not easy. There could be ice under the snow, and there was a danger of secondary avalanches. The first search was conducted manually and with the help of avalanche feelers, which are long light pins used to pierce the snow in an attempt to find a body. Several dogs were released at the same time. However, immediately after an avalanche, the chances of finding a person alive are the highest in the first 15 to 20 minutes. Later, the probability decreases sharply. On the evening of February 12th, the weather conditions deteriorated even more. The lighting was poor. It was snowing thickly, and the group feared more avalanches. The search had to be stopped periodically in order not to put people and dogs at additional risk. On the morning of February 13th, the management of the operation decided to expand the search area. Technicians who knew how to secure the area came to the site. They used low-yield explosive charges to trigger the descent of potentially dangerous areas before people went there. This is standard procedure in avalanche-prone areas, but each detonation lifted more snow into the air, and strong winds blew it around. This reduced visibility. The rescuers tried to coordinate their actions so as not to delay the search, but also to prevent the death of the team members. Canines led dogs on leashes because they could fall off the ledges or fall into cracks. The animals were also threatened with frostbite, and they were periodically taken to the base camp for heating. But the dogs persistently searched for at least a faint human scent under the thick layer of snow and ice. Sometimes they started scratching the ground with their paws, signaling that they smelled something. Rescuers rushed there with feelers, broke up the snow with shovels, but usually it turned out to be rocks or snags. In such conditions, it is difficult to determine the exact point. During the first 2 days of the search, we found several pieces of equipment. They found a broken-off part of a ski pole, a piece of a helmet, and a scrap of strong nylon fabric similar to the upper part of a jacket. Later, they recovered a fragment of a safety harness with a broken buckle. On it were initials written in white marker, which is how Alex signed his gear. These finds made the rescuers hope that they were on the right path, that Alex himself might be somewhere nearby, but under the snow. However, the signal from the beeper, which should send a radio signal, no one caught. Because of the terrain peculiarities, the waves could be distorted, and the batteries in the beeper, in the cold, lost power. Perhaps the device was damaged by rocks or snow pressure. This made the task very, very difficult. In the polar sector area, repeated snowfalls are common. Sometimes they are smaller in volume, but they can still swamp a search team or throw someone into a ravine. During February 13th and 14th, experts observed fresh cracks at the top of the ridge. These cracks indicated that the snow there was still unstable. As temperatures change, weak layers form inside the snow puff. Even a slight vibration can cause a new collapse. The people and equipment carrying out the search work create vibrations themselves. So, we had to constantly assess the risks. Some rescuers suffered minor injuries from shoveling, falling on slippery ice, or experiencing symptoms of frostbite. Their hands and feet would go numb, and if their gloves got wet, their fingers would cramp. The medics on duty at the camp helped the frostbitten, but warned that it was dangerous to continue working in such a condition. As a result, shifts were changed, and some people were temporarily out of commission. Alex's mother, Eleanor Vance, lived in another town. When she was notified of what had happened, she was distraught for a long time. She was told that Alex was missing in an avalanche, that a search was underway, but that the odds had dropped after the first few hours. Every day, she received calls from the military unit, updating her on the progress of the operation, but there were no concrete results. She asked if the dogs could have made a mistake, if more people or equipment were needed. In response, she heard that all possible resources were being utilized. Eleanor realized that the statistics in these situations were disappointing. If a person isn't found in the first 24 hours, the likelihood of finding them alive quickly diminishes, especially since there could be injuries incompatible with life under the snow. But the mother hoped for a miracle to the last, and imagined how Alex, with his great experience, managed to find an air pocket cavity under the snow mass. As time went on, however, the search reports became more and more gloomy. By February 15th, the new park rescuers, military, canines, and volunteers were beginning to run out of steam. Shift after shift scoured the avalanche zone, checking the maps in the approximate path of the avalanche. They checked different layers of snow, sometimes digging to a depth of more than 3 or 4 meters, but there were no results. On the third day after the avalanche, the chances, according to experts, fell to almost zero. It became too dangerous to continue work on a full scale. On February 16th, it was decided to stop the active phase of the search. Officially, Alex Vance was declared missing, and it was assumed that he died under an avalanche. Representatives of the Canadian Armed Forces issued a brief statement that Sergeant Vance most likely did not survive. At the same time, Blackwood Park management noted that conditions were extremely difficult and the danger of secondary avalanches jeopardized the search parties. Many volunteers offered to stay and dig further, but experts felt it was impractical. A man with so much experience, so much training, gone in an instant. The mountain had claimed one of its own. In the spring of 2018, Blackwood Park, as usual, attracted travelers and nature lovers. Its mountains and forests looked impressive and mysterious. That's when Michael Jones, a 22-year-old student from Silverton, British Columbia, better known as Mikey, disappeared. He was a computer programmer and student in Capital City, preparing to finish his course and with serious plans for his future. There was nothing unusual about the Jones family's daily life until things changed dramatically in April. On the evening of April 12th, Mikey left Capital City for Grand Falls on a Greyhound bus. This fact is confirmed by surveillance video footage. This footage was the last credible evidence of his presence. The next day, he stayed at the Riverbend Inn in Grand Falls, which surprised many as he had no acquaintances in that province. On April 14th, his cell phone was recorded in Mountain View, but that event proved to be the last sign of his activity. The family in Silverton became very alarmed, especially his brother, who noticed that Mikey had not returned. His phone stopped answering. Social media and bank accounts froze. Capital City Police, after discovering that the phone signal had reached Mountain View, dropped the investigation, which put the Jones family on edge. For months, there was no information about Mikey until one discovery in Blackwood Park brought him to new attention. His ID card was discovered in the cushions of a couch in the Summit Center shopping mall. For Mikey's mother, Sarah, it became a serious reason to keep looking. She drove from Silverton to Blackwood, hoping to find some trace of her son. The scenery and atmosphere of Blackwood reminded her of Silverton, and there was a suggestion that Mikey might have come here. Sarah talked to locals and put up posters trying to find any information she could. However, despite her best efforts, the search was fruitless. It remained unclear whether Mikey had left voluntarily to start a new life, or whether it was the result of another darker scenario. Some speculated that he might have developed signs of schizophrenia, but people who knew him personally had not noticed any such manifestations. Others speculated that he may have traveled to meet someone from the internet seeking new experiences. As a result, many versions never gave a concrete answer, and Mikey's mother still did not know where her son was or what happened to him. The story of William Linsky remains unsolved to this day, a quiet, lingering question in the vast Canadian wilderness. A young man with a future, a bus ticket to one city, and an ID card found in another. The pieces just don't fit. Robert Harris was a 42-year-old extreme sportsman. He specialized in base jumping and had a deep, abiding passion for mountaineering. On September 5, 2015, he went to Sentinel Peak in Blackwood Park, where he planned to make a wingsuit jump. His car was later found near the start of the trail, but Robert himself was not found. Rescuers have not been able to determine what happened to him, and he has been officially reported missing. In almost 10 years, he had made many successful jumps, including wingsuit jumps from high cliffs in Norway and Italy. Friends often marveled at his neatness. Usually, athletes who were into base jumping gave the impression of more reckless people. But Robert always carried a notebook with him, where he described in detail the trajectories, routes for climbing, and places suitable for landing. Lisa Chun, his friend and climbing partner, noted that it was his meticulousness and attention to detail that allowed Robert to avoid serious injury for years. Mount Sentinel in Blackwood Park is known for its steepness and often unpredictable wind gusts. The slopes here are made up of limestone rock that can crumble and form slippery ledges. In addition, the weather can deteriorate rapidly in late summer when the heat turns to colder temperatures. Local rangers have repeatedly warned hikers that even in seemingly favorable conditions, the mountain is fraught with danger. A sudden change in wind, unstable ground, or the onset of rain that turns to wet snow can make the descent deadly difficult. According to Lisa, Robert had said the day before he disappeared that he wanted to make the perfect jump, flying off a steep section of Sentinel Mountain and then flying smoothly in a wingsuit to a relatively flat area below. That's where he planned to land by parachute. On the morning of September 5th, he took along his standard gear: wingsuit, parachute, helmet, GPS device, and phone. He was also in the habit of making a plan in advance where to stop to put on the wingsuit and how to choose a point for the run-up. But as it turned out later, this time Robert did not leave exact coordinates or detailed route notes. For what reason he broke his own rule remains unclear. By late afternoon that day, Lisa discovered that Robert had not been in contact. Although it happens in base jumping that people turn off their phones to save battery life, or to avoid distracting calls. She was alarmed that she didn't hear from him until late that night. On the morning of September 6th, several friends went looking for Robert. His car was quickly located near the beginning of the trail leading up the slope of Sentinel Mountain. The car was parked in the same spot where he had left it the day before. Inside was nothing but an empty protein bar wrapper and a water bottle. No signs of forced entry or signs of a struggle were seen near the car. The friends soon called the rescue team, which began to inspect the mountain trails. In such cases, they check old climbing routes, ledges where extreme athletes like to set up launching pads. But it was difficult to find a specific point without precise landmarks. At that time, the weather started to deteriorate. Suddenly, it started to rain, and by the evening, it turned to snow. Its sharply worsened visibility made rocky surfaces slippery and dangerous for rescuers. They had to move in harnesses and helmets, stopping every few minutes to avoid falling off. Most often in disappearances of base jumpers, they considered the option of a parachute that failed to open or opened late, a miscalculated trajectory, or a hit against a rock. But in Robert's case, there were other versions. For example, he could have deliberately gone in an unknown direction, deciding to go into hiding temporarily, or started some experimental flight that he didn't tell anyone about. Others suggested that he had fallen into a crevasse and could not get out of it. The difficulty was that Mount Sentinel is replete with such crevices, and crumbling rock debris often covers tracks. The hardest part began when the temperature plummeted and it snowed heavily. Although it was still officially summer on the calendar, in the mountainous regions of the Canadian Rockies, the weather can jump around. Even experienced rescuers said they didn't expect such early snowfalls. The snow that fell quickly hid any shoe tracks, parachute landing prints, or possible impact sites. In addition, the high winds made it difficult for the rescue helicopters to conduct overflights. They were only able to make a few overflights, but cloud cover and precipitation prevented a thorough view of the slope. Unlike some similar stories where they found fragments of wingsuit wings or torn parachute slings, they found absolutely nothing. Dogs specially trained to search for people by scent tried to pick up the trail, but snow, wind, and humidity reduced their efforts to zero. Rescuers scoured every corner, but Sentinel Mountain was too big and the weather too bad. By September 7th, the search continued under very difficult conditions. People began to suffer from hypothermia, and visibility was down to a few meters in places. As the search dragged on, the team members had thoughts of a terrible outcome. There have been cases where the body of a missing base jumper was found a month or more later, and the remains were in such a state of disrepair that they were difficult to identify. In the high mountains, the temperature may favor slow braking activity. If a body has fallen on rocks, it may be partially hidden under debris or ice. Predators, wolves, bears, and coyotes can drag away fragments of equipment or the body itself. Rescuers were afraid of stumbling upon a scary picture, given that time passes and the snow could melt or shift again. Several teams of volunteers and Parks Canada representatives worked in shifts. First, they searched the main trails and neighborhoods. Then they widened the circle. They used binoculars and long lenses to see something from afar, but snowy debris and dark rocks merged into a monotonous landscape. The search participants had to struggle with emotional tension. Lisa Chun was also among the volunteers. She admitted that she kept replaying the possible accident in her head, trying to imagine what could have gone wrong. She had nightmares of Robert lying motionless among the rocks and ice, his parachute dangling in the wind. Every day she got up, hoping for news that he had been found alive, or at least delayed. Robert's cell phone still gave no sign. In the mountains, there's often no stable coverage, but even a weak signal can sometimes allow you to trace your last location. This time, there was nothing to be found. Probably either the battery was dead or the phone broke on impact. In an attempt to find any clue, experts checked the logs of nearby cell towers, but found no recorded attempts to call or transmit data. As is often the case in such cases, rumors began to form. Some said that Robert did not really intend to make a standard jump, but wanted to try a new flying technique that he had not told anyone about. Others thought that he may have decided to fake his death and go to another neighborhood. More realistic versions were that he simply miscalculated the angle of flight and collided with a rock, and then nature hid all traces. But since not even parts of the wingsuit or parachute were found, the situation was a matter of speculation. The Blackwood Park Rangers and police representatives started an official missing person procedure. Under provincial law, a person is declared missing fairly quickly, but recognizing a death requires more serious evidence. Meanwhile, the search operation continued for several more days, with a helicopter involved when weather conditions allowed for takeoff. However, with each passing hour, it became more and more obvious that the chances of finding Robert alive were slim. By September 10th, they began to talk about winding down the active phase. On the 9th day after the disappearance, the rescue team officially announced that the active phase was over. The search operations did not yield any results. Experts noted that in the conditions of Mount Sentinel and the heavy snowfall, the chances of finding any traces were minimal. Relatives were told that if the weather improved, another aerial search might be conducted, but only if new information came in. In the end, no new indications came, and the search gradually came to naught. For many, it was an eerie reminder of how easily even an experienced extreme climber can disappear without a trace in the mountains when nature dictates its own conditions. And for Robert's friends and family, a long period of uncertainty has begun. They have to live with the thought that somewhere in an inaccessible corner of Mount Sentinel, his body may be in a serious condition, hidden by snow, ice, and rocks, or scattered by wild animals. This grim version of events is frightening and unsettling. Nevertheless, hope for any news, however sad, still lives in the hearts of loved ones who would rather have some specifics than endless speculation about the mysterious disappearance of an experienced base jumper. These stories remind us how thin the line between the familiar and the unfathomable mystery can be, especially when it comes to the rugged and unpredictable nature of Blackwood National Park. The disappearances of Sergeant Alex Vance, student Michael Jones, and extreme sportsman Robert Harris still raise many questions and remain unsolved mysteries to this day. They just wanted to touch a beautiful thing, to take a couple of photos against the backdrop of picturesque Canadian mountains and clear, icy rivers. But in Blackwood National Park, even familiar places hold something sinister. In a matter of seconds, an ordinary hike turns into an unexplained disappearance that even the most extensive searches can't solve. Today, you are waiting for 3 mysterious stories in which a simple passion for nature turned into tragedy. How do people disappear without a trace in the mountains? Why are some bodies found where no one goes? And what do quiet Canadian forests and rushing rivers hide? The answers to these questions may be much scarier than they first appear. In July 2023, a tragic incident occurred in Blackwood National Park that, despite extensive searches, has never been definitively resolved. According to the Calgary Herald, a 29-year-old hiker from Calgary went missing after being swept into the rushing current of a local river. The case is still being discussed on social media and among seasoned travelers as an example that nature is capable of delivering the cruelest surprises, even where one considers oneself confident. According to open sources, David Sharma and 2 of his friends traveled to Blackwood Park in a bid to enjoy nature, beautiful views, and take some spectacular shots against the backdrop of the Canadian mountains. Their choice fell on the popular Glacier Lake Trail that leads to one of the region's scenic corners. It wasn't the first time the friends had been to Canada's national parks, and this kind of hike wasn't unique to them. The travelers reached a viewpoint near a footbridge over the North Saskatchewan River. Here, They decided to stop to take photos. This is the location that attracts tourists because of the unusual combination of mountain landscape, forest colors, and turquoise river. However, the beauty of the scenery has a danger. The river, fed by glacial waters, is actually much more rapid and cold than it may seem at first glance. According to eyewitnesses and reports from search and rescue teams, on Saturday night, a group of hikers, including Sharma, decided to go to the very edge of the bank to get some good shots of the rushing water. Allegedly, David Sharma slipped on a wet rock or lost his balance by stepping too close to the cliff and ended up falling into the river. A friend saw him fall, and then he was quickly swept up by the current. Local residents and rescuers emphasize that such stories are not uncommon in mountain rivers. A person is caught in the icy water by the powerful current before he realizes it. The North Saskatchewan here, although it appears to be a relatively safe mountain river to the untrained eye, is in fact a raging torrent with many underwater rocks and precipices. Several witnesses rushed to help. Someone threw ropes, but a sharp splash was already carrying the man downstream. In seconds, he was out of sight, hidden by the foam and the river's curves. News of the incident reached the nearest ranger station immediately. Within an hour, the first rescue team arrived on the scene to assess the situation and begin the search. Judging by the official report, the operation started immediately. People combed the shores trying to catch any detail, whether it was a backpack, shoes, a fragment of clothing. However, even on hot trails, there were no results. The very next day, large forces joined the investigation. Helicopters, patrols with drones, cynologists with service dogs. It quickly became clear that the river goes into a narrow canyon where it is extremely difficult to find a person. The water there is turbulent. Depths can change dramatically. The water temperature is in the neighborhood of 39 to 42.8 F, which in case of a fall without a wetsuit, leaves almost no chance of survival. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, along with the Blackwood National Park Authority, set up a field headquarters near the start of the Glacier Lake Trail. Information from locals, volunteers, and hikers who may have noticed signs of the missing man's presence flocked there. The office summary noted that searchers circled a significant area by helicopter, including difficult-to-traverse rocky areas. The case has been particularly loud in Calgary's Sikh community, where David Sharma was from. According to local media, Sharma was involved in volunteer projects supporting youth and helping organize cultural events in the city. His disappearance became a topic of discussion at the local temple, where acquaintances and friends prayed every day for his safety, hoping that he had somehow miraculously survived and made it out. He was an example of kindness and vitality to many, said one of the elders of the community. He loved the mountains, but always treated them with awe. We can't believe he could have been lost like this. People have been raising money to fund additional searches, writing appeals to local authorities. But sadly, even the widest response couldn't help where nature took over. For days, a clear pattern emerged. If the missing man had snagged on a rock somewhere or come ashore in a state of shock, he would most likely have been found by volunteers or rangers by now. There are no traces, no clues, no evidence that the man is alive. In fact, none of the hikers who made the trek downstream reported seeing or finding traces of Sharma, scraps of clothing, wet footprints, and the like. The organizers of the search were increasingly inclined to the sad conclusion that the rushing river could have carried the body much farther. Moreover, in some places the river goes into limestone crevices, forming peculiar underground currents. And even if the body is trapped somewhere underwater, it is almost impossible to find it in winter or at the current water level. The missing man's family, including his parents and siblings, remained in constant contact with police. According to a statement from Canadian police, everyone was warned that the hope of finding the man alive was melting away by the day. Relatives prayed, visited the scene, consulted with survival experts. But alas, the bitter truth is simple. Falling into an icy mountain river with a swift current is usually fatal. One of the family members who came from abroad said in an interview that he wants to believe in a miracle. David is a strong guy. He could have got out and is now wandering somewhere, having lost his memory. But everyone realizes that this is highly unlikely. The community's feelings were mixed: grief, shock, and hopelessness. About a week after the incident, search and rescue officials announced that the active phase of the search has been suspended. This is the standard wording used when all possible areas have been combed, witnesses have been interviewed, and resources have been exhausted with no new leads. The official communique noted, "We are not leaving the case closed, but we do not see the possibility of continuing the mass search in the absence of results. If new evidence or information comes to light, we are ready to resume full-scale operations." For Sharma's family and friends, this sounded like a verdict. Everyone realized that the chances of a magical rescue are now slim to none. Police and park officials emphasized that the tragedy serves as a reminder of the real risks of crossing mountain rivers or approaching them carelessly. In terms of mystery, the events surrounding Sharma's disappearance fit the mold of tragic stories where people disappear in the blink of an eye. However, there is no mystical halo here. It is obvious that the man fell into the river and was carried away by a strong current. However, a few points remain for the proponents of this phenomenology. Instantaneous disappearance. His friends saw him slip, and that was it. In a couple of seconds, the man was gone. Lack of finds. Despite an active search, no backpack, shoes, or body was found. It was as if the river had swallowed up all traces. Great weather. The whole day was almost clear with no showers or floods. A seemingly safe environment. Theorists point to the frequency of such water disappearances in national parks. But the rational explanation is simple enough. Cold mountain water, hidden undercurrents, and dangerous bottom geomorphology. Weeks after the incident, David Sharma's name is still in the headlines of the local press, and volunteers are still making rounds of the shores, time after time. However, statistics say that if a person is not found in that time, and if there is no specific tip-off, the search is likely to come to a standstill. Relatives will have a painful way to recognize the fact of unknown absence of their dear person. At the same time, to keep hope is hindered by the understanding of the harsh truth. The water at a temperature of about 39 to 42.8 Fahrenheit does not leave a chance for a long struggle, and the turbulent current reliably hides the body among underwater boulders or takes it many kilometers away. Sometimes the remains are found months later by spring fishermen or accidentally noticed by tourists. But often everything remains at the bottom of the river. On July 11, 1998, on the back slope of Mount Sulphur, one of the relatively obscure slopes in the mountain range, there was a discovery that will long remain in police archives under the label Unsolved. On that day, a group of climbers trying to find an alternative climbing route came across fragments of human remains. The site was off the main hiking trails deep in the forest zone, and it was not easy to get there. Steep cliffs covered with dense spruce and fir undergrowth were of little interest to those who followed the official routes. According to one of the climbers, they noticed the remains by chance when something bright and unnatural caught their attention among the tree roots. At first, they thought it might be clothes or garbage thrown by someone, but when they got closer, they saw parts of bones and almost mummified fragments of cloth. As the police, namely the officers of the district responsible for the mountainous areas, later found out there were indeed human remains lying on the site and in a condition indicating that the person had died at least 2 years before they were found. Forensic examination revealed that it was a male of Caucasian race, between 19 and 35 years old, about 6 feet tall. Excavations in a small area around the site yielded additional finds. Old keys to a Chrysler car manufactured in the 1970s and 1980s with a War Amps tag hanging from the bunch, a Canadian organization that distributes keychains to return them to owners in case of loss. Other finds included a black leather wallet labeled Amity and 2 photographic cards, one of which had an illegible address in Quebec. From the beginning, police realized this was an important lead. War amps can often help trace lost keys, and the photos and wallet theoretically offered a chance to figure out who the man was. But the situation was complicated by the time that had passed since the death. Forensic experts estimated that the remains had been there for at least 2 and possibly 3 years. This was compounded by the impact of nature. Animals could tear up some of the bones, damage the fabric of the clothes. There were almost no prints or identification marks on the remains of the skin. The car keys and War Amp's tag remained a key item. Police contacted the organization to see if the keys were registered to a specific name. But it turned out that after all these years, the database did not provide a direct match. When users of the War Amps program lose keys, it is possible to get them back through a special system. But if they have not been correctly registered there, or if the owner himself has not updated the information, it is difficult to find him. In some cases, P-fob numbers became inactive if the organization did not receive payment for the service. Police encountered exactly what the War Amps log or map did not give the exact ownership. Another way is to check out a 1970s to 1980s Chrysler. Several models were produced during this period, and they may have a close key format. Again, however, you need to know the specific thing or at least something more specific to search. There were several keys, and they may have belonged to both automobile and door locks. Law enforcement sent photos of the keys to Quebec, given that one of the photos contained an address. Perhaps a relative or the owner of the car lives there. But alas, that address was inaccurate. The photo had a half-removed street name, and the house number was illegible. A letter sent to the supposed address was returned with the notation addressee, unknown. As for the photographs themselves, one was black and white, apparently old, presumably from the 1970s, showing a middle-aged woman, possibly the mother, aunt, or grandmother of the unknown man. The second was in color with a partially visible Quebec address and a young man, possibly the deceased himself, in the company of someone else in front of a car. Parts of the photo have been lost. The edges have been damaged by moisture, and the text on the back is also damaged. Apparently, the owner of these photos carefully kept them. They were in a wallet which, although damaged by time, still retained its shape and the inscription Amity. The police worked out all the options. Perhaps the man came from Quebec, where he had relatives, then went to this mountainous region and for unknown reasons died. But no missing person matching the description, 19 to 35 years old, about 6 feet tall, was found in local databases. There have been some disappearances, but the dates didn't match when checked, and the Sulphur Mountain area isn't very popular with long-distance travelers. However, sometimes wildlife lovers wandered there and avoided the traditional trails. Why he ended up exactly where the remains were found is also a mystery. There was no sign of a camp, no sign of a campfire, no satellite accessories, only a couple of scraps of cloth that looked like pants and the wallet itself, which was lying in the middle of nowhere. The forensic medical report confirmed that the death could be accidental, fall, hypothermia, or other factors. Criminal behavior was not ruled out, but there were no gunshot wounds on the bones. Without soft tissue and DNA, at the time, genome analysis technology was not as advanced as it is today. The police were unable to obtain information on ethnicity other than approximate race and age. There was a high probability that it was a solitary traveler who had wandered into the back slope of the mountain and died as a result of some accident, fell off a cliff, caught in a storm, or wild animals killed. However, it was impossible to say for sure. If a missing Chrysler had been found in the area, that would have provided a lead, but nothing of the sort had been recorded. In 1998, forensic investigators were still counting on the possibility that media coverage might bear fruit. They published articles in local newspapers describing the Chrysler keys, the Amity wallet, and mentioned photos with a Quebec address. Police asked the public, "If anyone knows who these items may have belonged to, contact us." But no one responded with convincing evidence. Different people called, suggesting that the missing person was someone they knew, but matching details, height, age, time frame of disappearance ultimately yielded no match. Moreover, the gap of 2 years or more from the date of death widened the possibilities and made the search even more uncertain. So, the man's remains remain unidentified. The case is in police records under the code John Doe Sulphur Mountain. Every few years, when new methods of DNA analysis become available, there is talk of exhuming the bones and retesting them in a modern database. But in fact, the remains were buried in an unmarked grave in a local cemetery, and the bones suitable for examination were kept in an archive. If someday Canadian police decided to conduct genetic genealogy, as they do in the US, maybe the story would find closure. But as of now, in the year 2025, the man's identity is still unknown. A ghost on a mountain, his story told only by a faded photograph and a set of old car keys. In April 2017, 22-year-old Mark Benson from Rivertown, British Columbia, suddenly decided to travel to Grand Falls, as if succumbing to some impulse or plan he hadn't told his acquaintances and family about in the quiet mountain town of Rivertown, where he lived and worked seasonally. This news surprised his friends. They thought that Mark did not plan to go anywhere for a long time, at most for a short trip on business. Nevertheless, it is known that he got on an inner-city bus, left around mid-April, and never contacted again. On the video from the bus station in Capital City, where the route passed, you can clearly see Mark, a young man of medium height, athletic build with a small bag on his shoulder, saying goodbye to someone on the phone, getting on a flight to Alberta. Colleagues from his former seasonal job recall that a couple days before his departure, he had talked about wanting a change and looking for something new. But it didn't seem to anyone that this might mean a drastic break with his past life. When he stopped answering calls and texts in mid-April, people close to him thought that perhaps his phone was dead or he was temporarily out of touch. As the days wore on, however, the anxiety grew. Mark was usually a sociable person, did not disappear for long periods of time unannounced, and was in the habit of informing his friends of his plans. Parents and friends started checking social networks, but the accounts were silent. They started calling Grand Falls, asking if he had shown up at his friends' houses, but everyone had their hands full. A week later, when there was no word from him, one of his friends asked the Rivertown police to declare Mark Benson missing. However, the district police had no concrete leads. The guy left voluntarily, bought the ticket himself, and if he did not commit crimes, the official investigation could only record the fact, disappeared from sight. By the summer of 2017, his loved ones were struggling to solve the mystery, putting up ads in Grand Falls, trying to find out if he stayed somewhere in a hostel, if he took a job, but there was no sign of him. Occasionally, someone would report seeing a similar guy on a road or at a campground, but when checked, the information was either unreliable or about a different person. By the fall, Mark's parents feared the worst. He might have been involved in a criminal situation or an accident. The police, without concrete leads, handled the case more formally, periodically checking missing persons databases in the neighborhood. And so it went for a year, from April 2017 to April 2018, when few believed Mark would be found alive. But in late April 2018, something happened that simultaneously provided answers, but left even more questions. Hikers hiking in the Lake Minoa area near the town of Blackwood discovered the remains of a human body far from the main trails. At first, they thought it might have been a long-standing accident, especially since the area where the bones were lying was partially covered with driftwood and snow. According to hikers, the corpse was at a point where it was difficult to wander there by accident. Hilly terrain, dense undergrowth, no popular trails nearby, and 10 miles separate the area from the town of Blackwood itself. When the discovery was reported to the RCMP, Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the investigative team immediately contacted the Alberta and British Columbia branches, cross-checking missing persons reports. Clothing and some remaining personal belongings suggested that it could be Mark Benson. In his pants pocket, they found a passport in his name, badly damaged by moisture and time, but still legible. Preliminary examination showed no obvious signs of violent death, but due to weather conditions and animal activity, the exact condition of the remains did not tell us much. Whether it was an accident, suicide, or something else was still a mystery. The police experts who conducted the initial examination only noted that the corpse had probably been lying in the wilderness for several months to a year. The exact moment of death was difficult to determine, but the level of decomposition suggests that it happened no later than late summer 2017. How did he end up in the Blackwood area if he was originally traveling to Grand Falls? Blackwood police, after making a number of inquiries, found that there was no record of any active banking or phone activity from Mark after mid-April 2017. Some fans of missing person theories immediately began asking questions. Why was a man who intended to head to Grand Falls, 10 miles from Blackwood, on a secluded stretch of land near Lake Minoa? Did he have an automobile he could have used to get there? But friends claimed that Mark had no plans to buy a car. He usually traveled by bus. Still, maybe he made a transfer, hitchhiked, or decided to hitchhike. No one knows for sure. The cause of death remains unknown. Forensic experts found no injuries on the bones characteristic of violence, no gunshot wounds. The liver and other organs were not preserved in a condition to look for toxins or drugs. Police are not treating the case as suspicious. As a practical matter, there could have been a fall, hypothermia, or other factor. Although Blackwood Rangers reminded that the Lake Minoa area can be dangerous if not properly planned, sudden weather changes, wild animals, difficult terrain, and remoteness from civilization. In the end, no evidence of criminal character was found. This fits quite well into the officially neutral wording. Not established, but nothing suspicious. However, the circumstances of Mark's disappearance and further route remain full of mystery. Why did he turn to these parts? Did he go to the mountains of his own volition without telling anyone? Or did he decide to see the national park at the same time? Got stuck, got lost, had no money for food, got hypothermia, got injured. The versions are multiplying, none of them proved. Local newspapers reported that the Benson family, despite their grief and sorrow, breathed a sigh of relief when they learned at least where Mark had been found. It's better to know than to guess endlessly. Later, there was a brief farewell ceremony, and the case was formally closed by the police. But in the memory of the public, the story of Mark Benson remained a strange example. After all, the guy was clearly not going to become a solitary tourist in Alberta. Disappeared in the spring, and he was found a year later in the mountains many kilometers away. Missing person enthusiasts point out that the day of his disappearance was clear and warm, according to the bus driver. But suddenly, his fate took an unfathomable turn. Even if it is a common accident, many questions remain unanswered. How did he go there? What were his motives? Why didn't anyone see him on the way? How did no one stumble upon his body for a year if tourists sometimes walk there in summer? After all, the official version does not give a clear explanation. And so another name is added to the list of mysterious disappearances in Canadian parks, albeit found, but with unclear circumstances of death. 3 stories, 3 fates lost forever among the wilderness of Blackwood National Park. David Sharma, who disappeared in an icy river in front of his friends. The mysterious man from Mount Sulphur, whose identity has remained a mystery for decades. And Mark Benson, whose journey was cut short in a completely unexpected place, far from the intended route. Every year, thousands of tourists visit Canadian national parks to enjoy the stunning beauty of nature. But what if among the picturesque mountain slopes, dense forests, and tranquil lakes, there is something inexplicable that can change the lives of even the most experienced travelers in a matter of seconds? Today, we will tell you 3 mysterious stories that took place in Blackwood National Park. Disappearances that defy logic, strange discoveries, and questions that no one has been able to answer for many years. Why do people suddenly vanish into thin air? How do tourists end up on inaccessible mountain ledges without any equipment? What is really going on in these places? Get ready. Secrets that have yet to be revealed await you. At the end of August 2023, in the Cascade Mountains near the town of Blackwood, Alberta, Canada, an incident occurred that clearly demonstrated that even experienced and elderly tourists can encounter unexpected dangers in mountainous terrain. A 64-year-old man from Calgary who had set out on a solo hike did not return at the appointed time. Although, according to acquaintances, he usually planned his trips carefully and informed his relatives of his approximate return time. When he did not show up by evening, his relatives and friends began to worry. The next morning, rumors spread that his car had been seen parked at the runway of Blackwood, a small airfield often used by local pilots. The car was indeed found there, neatly locked with a paid parking permit on the windshield. The Blackwood police immediately responded to the report, and together with rangers began a search. Cascade Mountain, which towers over the valley, is known to be a popular but challenging route that requires a certain level of physical fitness and navigation skills. August in Alberta is usually a warm season, but the mountains are prone to unpredictable weather changes. Wind, sudden cold snaps at night, and steep trails where it is easy to slip. When police and rescue workers arrived at the spot where travelers usually start their Cascade trip, they found no signs of a recent campfire or overnight stay. Tourists often visit this area, but none of those questioned remembered a man matching the description. Given that the missing man often went into the mountains alone, it was decided to immediately call in an air search. The next day, a helicopter provided by Blackwood Park took to the air to survey the slopes of Cascade. Almost immediately, the pilots spotted something resembling a human figure on the eastern slope. The coordinates were relayed to the ground, and a ground rescue team equipped with descent gear reached the spot. There they found the body of the missing 64-year-old man. The body was located on a steep rocky area that did not appear to be part of a standard trail. Rescuers sadly concluded that the man had most likely fallen or been injured and was unable to signal for help. According to police officers who conducted the initial examination, the death did not appear to be suspicious in terms of foul play. There were no signs of a struggle or external injuries other than those consistent with a fall. However, the exact cause could not be determined at the scene. When the body was taken to the morgue, the forensic examination did not reveal any obvious signs of a heart attack or severe head injury, nor was there any evidence that he had frozen to death. Perhaps his heart couldn't handle the stress. He could have fallen from a ledge, or he could have been severely dehydrated. Officers officially told reporters that the case remains unsuspicious, but the exact details remain unclear. Among those interested in the phenomenon of unexplained disappearances, such cases attract increased attention. After all, despite the fact that the deceased man did not disappear without a trace, his body was found fairly quickly. It is still unclear why he ended up in an area where people do not usually go. Friends who knew him said he was careful and experienced. He had hiked in the Rocky Mountains when he was younger and knew the risks well. Some people think there might have been a sudden gust of wind or a landslide caused by wet rocks early in the morning, but this does not explain how he strayed from the official route into a fairly inaccessible area. His car left at the Blackwood airfield raised questions among people unfamiliar with the situation. Why not in the tourist parking lot by the trail? But at the airfield? But experienced locals explain that people often leave their cars there and take short, unofficial trails to Cascade to avoid the main routes and crowds. Perhaps the deceased wanted more privacy and chose a new route. Rescuers involved in the search describe Cascade Mountain as deceptive. Part of the route popular with tourists is relatively safe with marked trails, but a deviation to the right or left can lead to steep ski slopes and rocky cliffs. It cannot be ruled out that the man stumbled upon a snowdrift or ice in the shadow of the rocks, lost his footing and fell. Or he may have suddenly felt ill. Tragedies of this kind are not uncommon in the Blackwood area, although in most cases, rescuers have a more straightforward explanation. Friends described the 64-year-old Calgary resident as a mountain enthusiast who had climbed various peaks, including some more difficult than Cascade. It was therefore surprising that he did not manage to complete the route. However, there remains an element of unpredictability in this situation. Any mistake on a solo hike can be fatal. In addition, some note that his age may have already been affecting his physical condition. Perhaps he underestimated the risk. An official investigation lasting about a week determined that there were no signs of foul play or third-party involvement. Meanwhile, details surrounding the immediate cause of death, fall, hypothermia, or something like a heart attack, remain shrouded in mystery. Sometimes the mountains take people without leaving any obvious explanation, said one of the rangers, commenting on the incident. And although for the police this is simply a case closed with the status of accidental death, for observers familiar with the history of unexplained disappearances, a classic scenario is once again unfolding. A person disappears in a short period of time. Their car is found parked in an unexpected place, and their body is found on a mountainside with no obvious signs of struggle or injury. Everything looks like a natural accident, but it still leaves behind questions that no one will ever answer. The man's family did not give detailed interviews, only briefly thanking the rescuers for their quick discovery. They emphasized that the deceased had always loved the mountains and tried to live an active life. In the end, the incident was seen as a warning to other solo hikers. Respect the mountains and don't overestimate your abilities. Local residents continued to discuss the incident for some time, trying to understand whether it was a mistake in the route, a sudden deterioration in health, or a tragic combination of several factors. In the end, the death of a 64-year-old tourist on Mount Cascade in August 2023 is a classic example of a tragedy in a mountain park that the police do not consider criminal, but which at the same time gives rise to a lot of speculation. However, the fact that the traveler disappeared in a matter of hours and was only found from the air inevitably raises the feeling that people in the mountains can sometimes find themselves in situations that will never be fully explained. In August 1986, one of the most mysterious disappearances occurred in the area of Lake Marine, located in the picturesque foothills of the Rocky Mountains in Canada. 19-year-old Jessica Reynolds looked perfectly happy that day. It was a mild Canadian summer. The sun was gently warming the air, and her parents had suggested a small picnic on the banks of a mountain stream not far from a tourist campground. Jessica herself was an open, friendly, nature-loving girl. Many of her acquaintances said that she loved walking in the fresh air, often sketching in her notebook, and planned to attend art college. On that August day, there was no sign of trouble. The route to Lake Marine was well known to the family. They arrived there in their car in the morning, parked in a special parking lot, and walked to a stream a few hundred feet from the lake shore. Her parents wanted to pick some wild berries, but Jessica just smiled and said she would sit by the water and cool off while they finished. As her father and mother later recalled, they had walked away only a few feet, apparently to get closer to the bushes where the berries grew thicker. The girl remained in sight, and her parents could hear her humming to herself or tapping pebbles on a rock, playing at the water's edge. Time passed slowly. The summer heat softened by the mountain breeze. When her parents had picked a few handfuls of berries, her father called out that it was time to return to their daughter, but there was no answer. Only the sound of the stream rolling over the smooth stones reached their ears. Intrigued by the silence, they returned to the place where they had left Jessica and suddenly felt a chill. Their daughter seemed to have vanished into thin air. There were no signs of a struggle, no cries, and no evidence that she had even entered the water. Her bag and jacket were still on the boulder, but Jessica was nowhere to be seen. The parents' first thought was that Jessica might have gone off to relieve herself or decided to help look for berries, but their calls, repeated searches of the nearby bushes, and peering into the stream yielded nothing. Within a few minutes, her mother and father began to panic. It seemed impossible to them that a 19-year-old girl could just vanish like that when they were only 30 feet away. But alas, reality proved otherwise. Jessica was gone. Her parents frantically searched every inch around the stream, calling her name, hoping she had fallen into the water and was calling for help. But all they could hear was the buzzing of insects and the rustling of the forest. After almost half an hour, her mother ran to the nearest tourists on the main trail, begging for help, while her father continued to search for Jessica. A spontaneous search began. Several people, including a group of teenagers, helped call the rescue service from the nearest phone booth, because in 1986, almost no one had a cell phone, let alone in the mountains. By evening, the rescue operation was in full swing. Park staff and volunteers set up headquarters at Marine Lake and asked all tourists to report any details they had noticed. At night, dog handlers arrived with dogs, searched the forest along the creek, and checked for possible places where she could have fallen into the water. However, after sniffing Jessica's clothes, the dogs confidently picked up her scent from where she had been sitting. But after just a few dozen feet, they lost it, circling around, not knowing where to go next. It was as if the girl had disappeared without a trace, leaving no additional footprints on the damp ground. The morning brought even more volunteers. The Reynolds family begged people to help with the search. By the third day, there were already about 100 people coordinated by rangers. Several areas were designated for combing from the creek to the shore of Lake Marine and within a radius of several miles. Meanwhile, there were no new clues, no cries, no scraps of clothing, no broken branches that would clearly indicate the route of escape or abduction. If Jessica had been kidnapped by an unknown villain, how could he have done it so quietly and unnoticed? And why? According to her parents, the girl had no enemies or personal conflicts, and for a random criminal in the wild mountains, the likelihood of this is low. Police officers interviewed by journalists said they saw no obvious signs of a violent disappearance, but they could not rule out the kidnapping theory. When a week passed, people still hoped to find her alive. They thought that maybe she had gotten lost, but she was only a few feet away from her parents and surely wouldn't have gone far, especially since she was not a child, but a 19-year-old girl who knew where she was going. An aerial search was organized. Several helicopter flights surveyed the area, but the weather sometimes played into their hands. The sun was shining and visibility was clear, so if anyone was wandering through the woods, they would have been spotted. However, no distinctive signals were detected. For the local rescuers, the case was already starting to look strange. No clues, no obvious evidence, not even an accident. Had she fallen into the water? They checked the entire stream and the lake's shore in case the body had been carried out, but the water there was not very strong. A search dog showed no signs of her presence in the water. It was as if she had been swept away in a minute or two by an unknown force. 2 weeks passed since Jessica disappeared, and the search continued, albeit on a smaller scale. Her parents did not give up, publishing announcements and using the few media channels available at the time to draw attention to the story. Towards the end of the third week, the entire rescue team was thrown into a frenzy when one of the volunteers, A man in his 30s came across a strange sign while passing through a remote section of the forest. A hat was hanging from a tree branch at about human height. It was a light white hat, which, judging by the photo, matched the one Jessica had worn on the day of her hike. There were no belongings, no notes, no traces nearby, just a hat as if someone had carefully hung it there. The fact that it was 2 miles from the place of disappearance greatly puzzled the rescuers. The route between the creek and the place where it was found was not a well-trodden path, but crossed folds in the terrain where tourists rarely set foot. How did the hat get there? Why would Jessica hang it so neatly on a branch without leaving any other traces? The dogs checked the area around the find again. After briefly picking up the familiar scent from the hat, they darted nervously through the forest, but did not give any clear direction. The rescuers racked their brains, hoping that perhaps it was a signal for help, or that the girl had managed to walk those 2 miles. But then, what next? The police considered various theories, from an accident to some kind of mental breakdown on Jessica's part. Although there were no indications that she had any problems, her father recalled how cheerful she was and full of plans for the future, how close she was to her parents, and how she showed no signs of depression. The search continued for another week, but eventually came to a standstill due to a lack of results. Neither the body nor the girl were found. In desperation, by the end of the month, the park administration and the police announced that they were suspending the active phase of the search. Her parents clung to any possibility. They hired a private investigator and posted ads in border areas, as if Jessica could have been smuggled out by someone, but nothing worked. Since then, the story of Jessica Reynolds has often been featured in discussions of mysterious disappearances. She has been missing for decades, and her body has not been found to this day. John Taylor, 31, disappeared on June 6, 1997, near Minnewanka Lake in Blackwood National Park, leaving behind one of the most mysterious stories in this mountainous region. To this day, many who have heard about his case ask, how could this have happened under such seemingly clear circumstances? After all, John arrived at the lake that day with 2 old friends, Tom and Greg, to go fishing and enjoy nature. Initially, there was no sign of trouble. The weather was warm and the wind was light. John loved to sit by the water for long periods of time. He enjoyed the process of fishing and getting away from the noise of the city. Since he worked in an office in Calgary, such trips to the mountains were a rare treat for him. According to friends, they arrived at the shore of Minnewanka Lake around 9 in the morning, choosing a gentle pebble beach at the edge of the forest. The place was not very popular with tourists, better known to fishing enthusiasts, but other groups still visited from time to time. By 11 o'clock, John, Tom, and Greg had already cast their lines and set up a small camping chair. John was the most enthusiastic fisherman. He had professional tackle, several lures, and rods of various lengths. The fish could be found in the depths, but the guys noted that the water was calm for summer, and the sun was shining through light clouds. However, closer to noon, the weather began to change. Darker clouds began to gather over the mountain peaks, and the warm wind turned cool. Tom recalled that John had remarked, "It looks like there's going to be a light thunderstorm, but it might pass us by. This often happens in the mountains." Clear sunshine is suddenly replaced by a violent storm, which disappears after half an hour, leaving a clear sky. Accustomed to such capricious weather, the friends did not pay much attention to it. Around 12:30, the first gusts of wind began. Tom and Greg looked at each other. Should we pack up our fishing rods? But John said he wanted to go a little further along the shore. There, according to rumors, the water was deeper, which meant a better chance of catching a large trout. His friends waved him off. They decided to stay where they were, and John would walk along the rocky shore about 900 feet ahead, or maybe a little further, and then come back when he got tired. John grabbed one rod, a small backpack with lures, and headed northwest along the edge of the lake. Minwanka is a well-known body of water that stretches deep into the mountains. It sometimes looks deceptively calm, but can have steep drop-offs and cold currents. His friends watched John walk away, gradually disappearing behind a small ledge on the shore. Everything looked fine until about half an hour later, the storm hit. In just a couple of minutes, the clouds thickened. Heavy rain began to fall, and 2 or 3 claps of thunder rumbled over the water. The storm, however, did not last long, maybe half an hour at most. Then the sky began to clear. Tom and Greg got into the car to stay dry and hoped that John would do the same, find shelter in the fishing line, or return to them. But when the storm subsided and the boys went back out to look along the shore, John was nowhere to be seen. At first, Tom shouted, "Hey, John, how's the fishing?" There was no answer. His friends were a little worried, but decided that he might have gone further along the shore to avoid coming back, or gone deeper into the forest to find shelter from the rain. They waited 15 minutes, walked along the shore in the direction he had gone, and looked for footprints in the wet gravel. But soon they realized that the storm had washed away all possible footprints. By that time the rain had stopped, the sun was peeking through the clouds again, and the lake seemed calm and azure. But the friends were overcome with anxiety. John would not have left for so long without warning. Greg insisted that he always let them know if he wanted to change fishing spots or had changed his mind about fishing. After waiting for half an hour, Tom and Greg began a thorough search. They went into the woods, called out to John, walked 600 feet along the shore, but found nothing. No sounds, no signs. All that remained was an empty stretch of lake and the quiet dripping of water from the trees. John's car was still there, of course, as was their shared vehicle, which meant he hadn't gone anywhere. By evening, they realized that this was serious. They called the rangers, who quickly arrived with a small team to begin a surface search. Minwanka is in a fairly accessible location. There are tourist attractions nearby, and the town of Blackwood is 11 to 12 miles to the southwest. The missing man could in theory have made it to the city if he decided to cut his fishing trip short, but not tell his friends that wasn't like him. When his family found out, they sounded the alarm because John had no reason to disappear suddenly. The police and rangers launched a large-scale search operation. They searched the shoreline, the forest along the route, and questioned other fishermen. No one saw the man fall into the water or run away. A dog handler with a dog followed the edge of the forest, picking up the man's scent, but the rain had washed away the scent so much that the dog lost the trail after only 60 feet. That same evening, volunteers joined the search, combing the coastal waters and boats just in case. The night passed and hopes that John would come out on his own in the morning faded. In the morning, a helicopter took off and flew over the area to see if there was a man waving his arm or any obvious traces of a fire, but there was nothing. On the second day of the search, a professional team was called in. They searched the nearest coastal cliffs where someone could have fallen and gotten stuck, and divers partially searched the bottom in shallow water. For 2 days, there were no results. It was as if John had disappeared without a trace. John's mother, upon hearing this, drove to Blackwood, hoping to help or at least support those involved in the operation. On the 4th day, when everyone was beginning to feel hopeless, one of the search teams in a helicopter spotted a bright spot on a ledge above Minwanka Lake. The ledge was high, several hundred feet above the water, and the location was so inaccessible that even experienced climbers usually did not venture there. Looking through binoculars, the pilot spotted something that looked like a jacket. Ground rescue climbers were immediately called in, and they began the dangerous climb up the ledge. When they reached the right height, they saw the body of a man lying in a sort of pocket in the rock. Based on the description, it was undoubtedly John Taylor. His clothes matched, and his relatives identified his face. The main question for the rescuers was how he got there. After all, the climb, which was accomplished by professional climbers, required ropes, carabiners, and special fastenings. It is unlikely that 31-year-old John, who was not a rock climber, could have overcome such a steep wall on his own. The place resembled an eagle's nest. On one side was a sheer drop. On the other, a rocky ledge and a small crevice with stones. The second thing that amazed the rescuers was that it was unclear what caused the death. The body did not appear to show any obvious signs of a strong impact with the rocks, although it is understandable that not all traces are visible after several days in the sun and wind. However, major fractures characteristic of a fall from a great height are usually obvious. A forensic examination later found no obvious bone damage. Of course, there could have been some internal bleeding or cardiac arrest, but without an autopsy, it is difficult to say, and the body had already begun to decompose in the sun. Nevertheless, the police reported that nothing suspicious was found and officially found no signs of an attack, hence the wording. The cause of death is unknown, but there is no criminal background. The family was told that he may have slipped while trying to climb somewhere, but this raised many questions. Why would John want to climb such a steep cliff alone without any climbing skills or equipment? In conversations with the press, his friends were outraged. It's just not possible. First of all, John would never have climbed a rock without a safety harness. Secondly, even if a storm forced him to seek shelter, how could he have climbed a sheer wall 150 to 200 feet high? He wasn't an extreme person, although he enjoyed hiking. And how then to explain the absence of any traces of a fall? Rumors circulated that he might have somehow gone mad from being struck by lightning or suffered shock, but there is no clear confirmation of this. A flash of lightning could have had an effect, but it usually leaves characteristic burns. No such burns were found here. The police shrugged their shoulders. They had no reason to continue an in-depth investigation. Everything pointed to an accident, albeit one that defied logic. Skeptics say that Taylor most likely panicked while trying to escape the violent storm and decided to look for higher ground, or accidentally stumbled onto a dangerous slope, then slipped and somehow got caught. But the fact that the body was lying on flat ground with no visible signs of a fall leaves room for speculation. John's family was shocked and devastated. They spent many years wondering what could have happened. "At least we found his body and buried him," said his mother. "But we still don't understand what happened to our son in that moment of the storm." Rescuers recalled the incident as one of the most inexplicable in their careers. Usually, you can follow the logic. He slipped on the edge, fell into the lake, dived for fish, was caught by the current. But here, the picture is strange. There is a considerable vertical distance from the lake shore to that ledge, and there is no easy way to get there. How did he get there in such a short time? Obviously, no one saw John walking there because the storm had forced people to take shelter. But to climb up there in half an hour or an hour without any equipment. Why? And why didn't his body look like it had been in a serious fall? This story sparked a wave of rumors in the Blackwood area. Some spoke of a sudden hallucinatory state caused by a lightning strike or electromagnetic discharge, saying that the man unconsciously went where he would not have gone in his right mind. Others put forward theories about someone's evil joke, claiming that he had been brought there and left, but no traces of dragging or struggle were found. The police closed the case, stating in their report that the death was not criminal in nature, cause unknown. The official record reads, possibly an accident under adverse conditions. These three stories are just a small part of what Blackwood National Park has to offer. The disappearances of Jessica Reynolds, John Taylor, and the tragic death of an experienced hiker on Cascade Mountain show how thin the line is between a normal hike and an unexplained tragedy. Despite the best efforts of search and rescue teams, police, and experts, no clear answers have been found to the main questions. What exactly happened to these people? And why did it happen to them? Do you believe that these cases were just unfortunate accidents, or do you think there is something more to it? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more mysterious stories and unusual investigations. Don't forget to click the bell to be the first to know when new videos are released. Take care of yourselves and be careful, because nature always has secrets it is in no hurry to reveal.